The FAA's incompetence has once again been exposed. Not only does the issue extend beyond the cooling steel plate or the sonic booms, but now the FAA is also struggling to assess Starship's new thermal protection system, or TPS. So, what is it now? What problems do the FAA have with Starship's new heat tiles? And how does this impact the progress of Starship's launch schedule? Let's find out in today's episode of Alpha Tech. The tension between the FAA and SpaceX has intensified following the defense given by FAA's head, Mike Whitaker. The false claims he made have infuriated Elon, who posted on X he needs to resign. Underneath this post was news of Whitaker's impeachment after being confronted with SpaceX's evidence. Additionally, several mainstream news outlets reported on the incident, accusing Mike Whitaker of lying, which led to significant doubts about his leadership of a government agency. More and more, we're witnessing the bad of the FAA and its management department through their work. Recently, in response to the question of whether SpaceX could use the waiting time for a launch license, which included the catch action to conduct another flight for, the FAA replied, "The FAA requires a license modification if an operator proposes a change that is material to public safety. A change is material to public safety if it alters or affects the following: class of payload, type of launch or re-entry vehicle, type or quantity of hazardous material, flight trajectory, launch site or re-entry site or other landing site, or any system, policy, procedure, requirement, criteria, or standard that is safety critical." Just from reading this, we can already see the answer from SpaceX. Of course, they have no other option but to wait for the launch license until November, because even the smallest change to Starship's new heat shield could impact public safety. A proposal to conduct a return to the launch site for the booster if the FAA has not previously evaluated and authorized it for prior flights is a change that is material to public safety. A change of a vehicle's thermal protection system may be material change if the TPS is a safety-critical system or component that could affect public safety. Well, I don't know if you guys feel the same way I do, but I think that's a load of BS. First, it's clear that the FAA is not just about spending an additional 60 days investigating the catch of Super Heavy B-12, but also investigating the new heat shields on Ship 30. Does that mean they're lying about their investigation timelines in reports, hearings, and to the public? Second, if the launch were conducted like Starship's Flight 4, both stages of the rocket would have to land in an uninhibited ocean area. So does it truly relate to public safety like the FAA says? So nearly everything a space company does, from processes to part changes anywhere, down to the size of the pencils used in the office, could somehow be described as affecting public safety, and as a result could be indefinitely blocked by the FAA. Another clear example demonstrating the incompetence and buffoonery of the FAA and its unnecessary environmental investigations. If you agree with this, comment yes, and if not, please share your personal thoughts below the video so we can talk about it all together. Unable to endure the situation, SpaceX President and CEO Gwynne Shotwell has now also criticized the government agency. As a member of the Texas Space Commission, Shotwell told the House Appropriations Committee September that SpaceX does not have specific issues with Texas regulators, but is experiencing problems with federal entities. Shotwell expressed concern that government bureaucracy is hindering progress as the company works to continue launching its massive Starship boosters from South Texas, as well as other operations. "This is not an issue for our competitors overseas," she said. "It's an issue here in the United States." And that's undeniable. Honestly, SpaceX's success is built on rapid iteration and development, and delays due to these regulatory processes could really slow down progress. There may be a perception within the company and among supporters that the FAA is being overly cautious or simply does not fully understand the complexity of SpaceX's tech. This situation highlights a bigger challenge for emerging technologies: how to balance the need for comprehensive safety oversight with the pace of innovation. It raises critical questions about whether current regulatory frameworks are equipped to handle the rapidly evolving nature of modern space companies without slowing up their development. However, the solution may need to come from more government agencies, as they represent the outdated methods of a bygone era. Just 5 years ago, spaceflight was not a routine activity like other modes of transportation, but it's becoming more common. In recent years, the number of space launches to orbit has increased every year. SpaceX flew 94 times in 2023 and plans to launch 150 times here in 2024. So far, SpaceX has done over 90 orbital launches, accounting for 93% of all worldwide launches. That's a launch schedule every 4 days, and that's becoming increasingly difficult for the FAA to manage this very busy pace. SpaceX took 2 years to get a license for the first launch, several months for the second, and now the fifth launch. SpaceX is eager for the government to move as quickly as they do. If you can build a rocket faster than the government can manage it, that's a reversal that probably needs to be talked about. So it's clear that the government agency definitely needs some regulatory reforms of their own. There needs to be some level of prioritization for programs of national importance. For example, launches supporting Artemis. One would think that such launches would get handled with maximum efficiency, all within the context of ensuring public safety. SpaceX's Starship program is ambitious, with plans for dramatically lower costs and much bigger payloads to currently inaccessible destinations throughout the solar system. But SpaceX seems far from an operational cadence that would bring those goals within reach. They like to begin deploying their next-gen satellites specifically designed for launch aboard Starship, and also fulfill their promise to bring humans back to the moon. In 2021, NASA gave SpaceX a $2.8 billion contract to develop a lunar lander based on their Starship architecture to put humans back on the moon. SpaceX's success would mean progress for NASA and the United States' goals for the Artemis program, and the company believes that a slow certification process is hindering national interests. During a Senate hearing in October of last year, SpaceX's VP for Build and Flight Reliability, Bill Gerstenmaier, urged Congress to streamline regulations and increase the FAA headcount for a faster issuance of space launch licenses, emphasizing that the office needs at least twice the resources they have today. Gerstenmaier was the former chief of human spaceflight over at NASA. SpaceX thinks that the FAA's workforce has not increased with the boom in launch cadence. The FAA's Space Division has been calling for more resources for several years, but with little luck. To get Starship's launch license, the agency had to shift the resources allocated for SpaceX to support the operational Falcon 9 launches, meaning that Starship's fast pace began to interfere with the company's Falcon missions. SpaceX was competing with itself to get more launches. Ever since its inception, the FAA has licensed over 634 launches, 34 of them being commercial human spaceflight missions as of this episode. After the Senate hearing earlier this year, lawmakers from the U.S. Senate Space and Science Subcommittee pushed the FAA to accelerate the approval of commercial launches, citing the space race between the U.S. and China now. In response, the FAA is working to hire additional staff and prep for a substantial increase in launch cadence in the coming years. But recruiting high talent has been pretty difficult. The GEO mentioned in its report that in one instance, the FAA didn't get an adequate candidate pool for 4 out of 10 human spaceflight-related positions for which it had already been actively recruiting. Over half those came from NASA, having had the experience in crewed flights via the Commercial Crew Program. The best people with the recent knowledge and experience of human and non-human spaceflight are the ones that are actually working in the industry themselves, and that makes it pretty hard for the FAA to hire them. The agency also created a new aerospace rulemaking committee to streamline the launch and reentry licensing process. The committee will work in tandem with the industry partners and help the FAA review and approve spaceflight activities as quick as possible without compromising safety. It's evident that with future flights, the FAA is aware that Starship will likely undergo numerous design changes, further increasing the agency's already growing workload. However, the outcome seems to be heading nowhere. Despite assurances from Kelvin Coleman, the FAA's admin for commercial space transportation, that they would collaborate with SpaceX to ensure regulatory oversight has minimal impact on launch ops while still maintaining their stringent safety standards, the reality appears quite different. Instead of streamlining the process, the FAA seems to be overcomplicating matters to the extent that SpaceX considers many of these interventions unnecessary. Starship's constant evolution and its cutting-edge tech demand regulatory flexibility, but SpaceX argues that the FAA's excessive caution is actually stifling progress. What was supposed to be a cooperative effort has instead turned into a bottleneck, frustrating not just SpaceX, but also highlighting the need for the FAA to rethink its approach in this rapidly advancing industry. This is truly a golden moment for SpaceX's era of innovation as the company has built and launched the world's largest spacecraft, Starship, with features we could have never imagined before. However, the path to creating a new concept has not always been smooth. It's unbelievable that a government agency like the FAA has hindered the country's progress due to outdated, cumbersome, and downright unacceptable regulations. Perhaps the FAA has not yet realized the true importance of Starship. And so, we want to know, how will SpaceX wake the FAA up? Why will Starship launch be more important to the world than the FAA actually thinks? On September 25th, Elon's tweet calling for FAA admin Mike Whitaker to resign is a major humiliation for the agency, as well as a stark warning to government agencies in general about their mismanagement investigating SpaceX's launches. However, that outburst was just the beginning. To further emphasize the significance of SpaceX, especially Starship, the person often seen as the driving force behind SpaceX's growth, Gwynne Shotwell, had to speak out against the accusations that have caused delay in Starship's launches. During a hearing September 24th before the House Appropriations Committee, Shotwell made it clear that the EPA's actions in regulating the Starship Super Heavy Deluge system were nonsense. "We work very closely with organizations such as the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality," she said. "You may have read a little bit of nonsense in the papers recently about that, but we're working quite well with them." On Tuesday, Shotwell maintained that the system, which she said resembles an upside-down showerhead, was licensed and permitted by TCEQ. EPA then came in afterward and didn't like the license or the permit that we had for that and wanted to turn it into a federal permit, which we're working on right now. The state agency has said that the company received a stormwater permit, a type that's usually quickly approved, but did not have the permit required for the discharge of industrial wastewater produced by launches. That type of permit requires significant technical review and usually takes almost a year to approve. The problem with this demand by both EPA and TCEQ is that SpaceX is not dumping industrial wastewater produced by launches. The deluge system uses potable water, essentially equivalent to rainwater, and thus does zero harm to the environment. In fact, a single rainstorm dumps far more water onto the tidal islands of Boca Chica than any of SpaceX's Starship launches. It turns out that alongside the FAA, we can also see that the EPA proves the political nature of this regulatory harassment. The unelected apparatchiks in the federal bureaucracy are hunting for ways to stymie and shut down SpaceX, and they will use any red tape they can find to do so, even if it makes no sense. They're doing this because they support the Democratic Party, and thus are abusing their power to hurt someone, Elon Musk, who now happens to oppose that party. Despite the intense pressure from certain agencies, Shotwell has maintained a firm stance. "We are not afraid of regulation," she said. "It helps keep businesses thriving as well as the community safe. All I'm saying is as this business grows, you'll probably enhance the regulatory environment, and there's just a caution that you really want to make sure that regulation does not impede progress." Shotwell also highlighted SpaceX's strong growth in Texas. Starship facility is a one-of-a-kind facility to make, test, and launch the most advanced rockets on the planet. Starship is capable of launching over 150 metric tons into Earth orbit, Shotwell added, outlining that as part of SpaceX's Starbase development, it's invested more than $3 billion over the last few years, with just $1 billion in outlays in Texas this past year. This is clearly a major development opportunity in the Texas region, and it also has importance in impacting the entire U.S. space industry. Starship has been promised to operate like an airplane, ushering in a new era for many essential jobs. You can imagine if planes were not reusable, very few people would fly. A 747 costs around $300 million, and you'd need 2 of them for a round trip, Elon once said. Yet I don't think there's anyone that's paid $500 million to fly. The reason is those planes can be used tens of thousands of times. And unlike any other orbital launch system, Starship would be fully reusable. This gives Starship the clear advantage in reducing the cost of sending cargo into orbit, precisely everything without exception. Want to launch a bunch of Starlinks into space? Well, it's too expensive. Are you crazy? Oh, there's a rocket that can launch 150 tons into orbit? Well, suddenly, that's now a whole lot cheaper. Elon has said that using fully reused rockets would cut launch costs to around $2 million a flight, or even to lower than $1 million when Starship is reused for the 5th time. If launch costs drop to those expected levels, spacecraft could get to a higher consumption level, which in turn reduces manufacturing costs. Starship's impact will eventually ripple through the entire industry, leading to widespread cost reductions. However, lower costs are just one of the opportunities Starship brings to the table. This massive rocket has the volume to transport an entire home into space, allowing for the construction of far more complex satellites. For example, launching something massive like a deployable lunar telescope, once deemed impossible, is now financially feasible and could be done in a single launch. The adage, low Earth orbit is halfway to anywhere, still holds true today. Space exploration has always been hampered by the first step, getting off Earth. When we can significantly increase the payload to orbit, we unlock opportunities to lower the cost of other space missions through the economies of scale and the use of in-situation resources. Indirectly, Starship could benefit by the state of suborbital and orbital sciences bringing down space debris back on Earth. Space junk presents hazards to launching vehicles and operational orbiters, and any solution to reduce that crowding in the skies could be tremendously important. Such a cleanup mission could even see Starship recovering dead satellites in SpaceX's Starlink system as they grow in number. Honestly, with Starship's unique capabilities and its future missions, it's got the potential to render all other launch vehicles across the world obsolete. This could make SpaceX a dominant force in space and give the U.S. an advantage in the escalating competition with China for space supremacy. All told, NASA will pay SpaceX around $4 billion for 2 lunar landings. By comparison, NASA's SLS and the Orion, developed for the Artemis, have cost over $44 billion since 2006. That rocket system had its first test flight in 2022. According to NASA's current plan, SLS and Orion will transport astronauts from Earth to lunar orbit, while Starship completes the final leg of the journey, ferrying them from the Orion spacecraft to the moon's surface. However, Elon has admitted back in 2020 that he hopes SpaceX will fly hundreds of missions with satellites before attempting crewed flight. SpaceX also needs to build and test versions of Starship that'll serve as refueling tankers. A lander must be equipped with life support systems, and NASA will require Starship to complete an uncrewed lunar landing test before allowing astronauts on board. Of course, SpaceX emphasizes that explosions could be an integral part of the company's development process, including early-stage rocket fire incidents, as a way to learn how to build better rockets faster than relying solely on ground tests. That's why allowing Starship to conduct multiple launches is so crucial. Not just a few launches, but a bunch. Especially at this point, when everything's ready, it needs to launch as quick as possible. And the FAA clearly does not realize that, or they know it, but they choose to ignore the nation's common interests for their own benefit. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean is China, and we rarely hear about that. It can be said that China has made some serious progress, especially lately, and to achieve that, besides the strength of science and technology, their management system is just quite good. Not only is it less affected by cumbersome processes, but the aerospace sector always gets favored, getting the best conditions and great support from the Beijing government. That's why the number of Chinese rocket launches is increasing more and more. And thanks to that, they've deployed many important missions in quite a short time, like lunar orbit missions, lunar landers, and lots more. In particular, in just over a year, they built their Tiangong space station. With a clear plan, along with the power of science and technology, as well as the support of their government, they're soon going to achieve their goals. What they have done has threatened the U.S.'s current leading position in the space race. The government and the FAA need to revisit the regulatory system now more than ever. If an agency isn't helping the aerospace industry develop and actually becomes a major barrier, should that agency still exist? We can assert that if the FAA, with its slow, cumbersome, and bureaucratic working style, still does exist, perhaps none of Musk's, Americans, or humanity's dreams will ever come true. The moon, the Mars, the solar system, and the universe, everything will be beyond our reach. For the U.S., their previous absolute dominance is still being threatened by the opposition. And it's none other than the FAA, an agency that they established has put them in that situation. The coming years are going to be extremely important, which will decide who wins the space race and who will be the leader of the new civilization. With SpaceX, they simply need to do well with the Starship as they are. When the time comes, it'll be time for them to become the flagship to bring humanity to a new era. As for government agencies, reforms need to be carried out immediately, and barriers need to be handled, even eliminated, if they prevent the development for the country and humanity. The world is eagerly awaiting the Starship flight, and for the people of Texas, the anticipation is heating up. In the past, the Texas government wholeheartedly supported SpaceX. Now, as SpaceX once again faces drama from the FAA, state legislators have spoken out, urging the FAA to ease regulations for SpaceX. Could this be the key to unlocking the path for the fifth flight and many more in the future? Amid the ongoing delays keeping Starship grounded due to FAA regulations, opposition has emerged. Beyond the widespread criticism from the space community and aerospace industry, members of Congress have also voiced their disapproval of the FAA's handling of the situation. Besides the points we covered in the previous episode, a notable recent development involves a congressman from the House Foreign Affairs Committee who represents Texas's 3rd District. He sent a letter to the FAA's admin, Mike Whitaker, strongly encouraging him to expedite the environmental review process for SpaceX's ops in Texas. After this info was made public, it garnered significant attention. Elon briefly responded to 2 tweets referencing Congressman Self's letter, saying, "Much appreciated and cool." Even we felt a sense of relief, knowing that there's still a lot of support for SpaceX. Many media outlets have pointed out that the claim that SpaceX is polluting the environment is absurd, especially considering that all other launch service providers discard their rockets, along with any unburned, potentially toxic fuel into the ocean. Except for SpaceX, which even after a decade is the only company brave enough to build a reusable, outperforming every competitor, including global superpowers. And to this day, SpaceX is a company with global influence, playing an important role in maintaining the U.S.'s leading position in the space race. In Congressman Self's letter, he stated, "Our nation must maintain our commitment to leading the world in the responsible and constructive use of space through an innovative commercial industry. And U.S. leadership in this area is dependent on an agile, efficient regulatory system that promotes and enables rapid commercial innovation." Indeed, if the U.S. wants to stay as top dog, its regulatory management has to at least match the pace of the industry's development. But the FAA's restrictive stance on SpaceX's Starship launch process has created significant barriers to the company's ambitious plans. Although SpaceX demonstrated readiness for multiple launches, including the highly anticipated Flight 5, environmental and regulatory reviews by the FAA have led to frustrating delays. These delays not only affect SpaceX's immediate launch schedule, but also threaten the company's long-term goals, like increasing the annual launch cadence from Starbase, Texas, which is crucial for advancing both the Starship program and the broader U.S. space industry. We are unable to restrict or regulate our adversaries. We can only out-innovate them. Yes, China is aggressively making strides in their space program, and as we can see, they are closely following what SpaceX does. Why? So they can copy, catch up, and use the very innovations that SpaceX has pioneered to keep the U.S. surpassing everyone else. This risk is growing as many companies in China are adapting to vertical landing methods to keep pace with reusables. To prevent this, Congressman Keith Self has proposed increasing the number of Starship launches from Starbase from 5 to 25 annually, enabling the development of super heavy lift and global mobility and logistics technology, a disruptive technology that changes the calculus for our adversaries in the Indo-Pacific, as well as NASA's Artemis program to return astronauts on the moon ahead of China. Additionally, Congressman Self publicly criticized the FAA for its slow response, highlighting how bureaucratic processes and reliance on media narratives are undermining innovation in the U.S. space sector. He expressed frustration that the FAA seems to have been swayed by unfounded concerns from national media, despite the agency's own environmental reviews indicating that an increase in SpaceX's launch frequency would not harm the environment. Congressman Self's frustration reflects a broader concern, once again tied to China, whose space programs don't face these regulatory constraints and are actually supported by their government. He argues that if the U.S. hopes to stay the leader, the FAA has to overcome this red tape and allow SpaceX to hit its full potential. The entire letter from the congressman representing Texas points out everything that the FAA seems to have overlooked, hoping it serves as a wake-up call for the agency to reconsider its approach. Besides Congressman Self's views, John Cowan, the newly elected mayor of Brownsville, also supports SpaceX. He described the program as the region's most reputable new neighbor. He called the company great partners with whom he shares open lines of communication and a productive and open relationship. While he has not yet met Elon Musk, SpaceX's CEO, he and city manager do meet regularly with Kathy Loiters, the longtime NASA engineer who's now GM at Starbase, and Marcela Cortez, the facility's external affairs representative. Cohen described the community's sentiment towards SpaceX and its desire to launch more Starships each year as very positive. Residents are also pleased with the development of the area's LNG industry. Frankly, the top officials of Texas don't favor SpaceX and Elon by accident. They all have their reasons, which is to make their state stronger and more prosperous. The arrival of SpaceX was like a savior for Texas, bringing about a remarkable transformation to the state. In 2013, and according to the census, the town of Brownsville, Cameron County, Texas, was the poorest city in the U.S. This was a heartbreaking statistic for Texas officials. However, that same year, SpaceX made its appearance and began driving Brownsville to change. According to the latest info from Cohen, Brownsville is now the leading U.S. city in terms of economic mobility growth. Recent investments in the Port of Brownsville and several billion-dollar projects, including SpaceX, the commercial space company, which has invested over $3 billion in its Starbase operations near Boca Chica Beach, are continuously elevating the economic standing of the area. According to a 2023 economic impact study, SpaceX pumped in $430 million in operations in Cameron County, said former Brownsville Mayor Trey Mendez. The investment includes wages, constructions, and capital improvements. In 2022, the company added nearly $1 billion to Cameron County's total economic output, while also contributing to continued job growth. Mendez notes that SpaceX has become our largest private employer with 1,600 employees, 71% are whom from the Rio Grande Valley, and the company has established a major presence in the city for various operations. Before SpaceX's arrival, Texas already had major universities producing a highly skilled workforce every year. However, at that time, the region didn't have many potential companies for them to grow with. As a result, after graduation, much of the workforce would move to other areas across the country for work. By relocating to this area, SpaceX has created job opportunities for the local workforce. On March 30th, 2021, Elon posted a tweet with the content, "Please consider moving to Starbase or Greater Brownsville, South Padre area in Texas and encourage friends to do so. SpaceX's hiring needs for engineers, technicians, builders, and essential support personnel of all kinds are growing rapidly." This tweet has given great inspiration to the workforce in Texas. At that time, Elon announced he and SpaceX donated $20 million to Cameron County schools. These are great contributions to help improve the county's education system, creating better conditions for educational institutions to train a high-quality labor force who can choose to come back and contribute to SpaceX or any other company in Texas. As we know, SpaceX is a large company and its employees get high salaries, and this income helps Texas residents improve their family lives. Not only do SpaceX employees benefit, but workers at other companies also get better compensation. According to an employee at a local manufacturing company, SpaceX's high wages have led local businesses to increase their own employees' salaries. Moreover, tourism activities have also seen an uptick. SpaceX enthusiasts frequently gather here to witness Starship operations. It's estimated that this area could attract 15,000 visitors each month to watch SpaceX rocket launches from Boca Chica Beach. Consequently, many restaurants, hotels, and other services have been developed to cater to the massive influx of tourists. Next year, as the frequency of Starship launches continues to go up, the number of visitors will likely grow even more, bringing revenue to both local residents and to Texas's government. These benefits are incredibly important for a state like Texas. As a result, Texas authorities have given considerable support to SpaceX for the development of its Starship program. Cohen said, "How Brownsville can help, but also how SpaceX can help Brownsville, I really appreciate that relationship. It's a symbiotic relationship." Texas is a state with regulations and policies that greatly favor companies like SpaceX. After SpaceX arrived, the Texas government introduced many incentives for this company. In 2014, they granted SpaceX a 10-year property tax reduction in exchange for building the spaceport in the state. They later awarded SpaceX $15 million to encourage and help develop infrastructure. Additionally, SpaceX consistently gets significant support from the Texas state government when launching Starship. While federal agencies like the FAA and Fish and Wildlife have impeded SpaceX's Starship missions, the Texas government has often taken actions to support the company. They work to expedite procedures for SpaceX, like road and beach closures during tests or launches, and assist in processing permits for SpaceX's Starship launches. In 2022, when SpaceX faced FAA investigations before its first orbital flight test, the company considered relocating the Starship project to Florida, which would allow it to expand and avoid stricter regulations from federal agencies. At that time, Texas officials took multiple actions to retain SpaceX. This was understandable, as losing SpaceX would be a significant blow. They stated they'd do everything in their power to help SpaceX and create the best possible conditions for the company to grow, with a long-term goal of making Boca Chica SpaceX's permanent headquarters. And that would allow Texas to continue growing and rise to becoming one of the leading states in the United States. Oh my goodness! Falcon 9 once again encountered an issue with its upper stage in space, marking the third time the rocket's found problems since its first incident back in July. What exactly happened here, and how did Elon explain it? When will SpaceX be launching again? Finally, after a 2-day delay, Crew 9 mission successfully lifted off Florida's Space Coast, embarking on a 5-month expedition to the ISS. August 28th, Crew 9 carried NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov aboard the Crew Dragon capsule Freedom. Everything appeared to go smoothly. Falcon 9's first stage aced its landing shortly after liftoff, and the upper stage deployed Freedom into proper orbit. Capsule's on track to hit the ISS Sunday afternoon, September 29th, as planned. But unfortunately, the upper stage found an issue after completing that job. This was reported by SpaceX the following Sunday morning. After today's successful launch of Crew 9, Falcon 9's second stage was disposed in the ocean as planned, but experienced an off-nominal deorbit burn. As a result, the second stage safely landed in the ocean, but a bit outside the targeted area. We will resume launching after we better understand the root cause, SpaceX wrote in a post on X. Indeed, Falcon 9 has been scheduled to launch 20 broadband satellites for Eutelsat OneWeb from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California Sunday night, but that liftoff got postponed. This proactive approach by SpaceX to handle the issue is commendable, especially since they decided to halt the next launch even before the FAA said anything. This is one of the criteria by which we can distinguish SpaceX from other rocket companies. Being transparent about an issue is wise. When you know your mistakes could be brought up in the future, it pushes you to improve, and we believe SpaceX will quickly find ways to address and resolve issues, even if some bad actors attempt to use these incidents to criticize or undermine the company. Moreover, in our opinion, this is one of the least serious mistakes SpaceX could make, as long as they know about it. And one thing's certain, every mistake can be fixed, which makes it easier to forgive, and this mistake does fall into that category. After all, nothing's perfect, and space far from easy. The minor issue with Falcon 9's upper stage follows another issue that happened 3 months ago. On July 11th, Falcon 9 experienced a liquid oxygen leak in the upper stage during the launch of 20 Starlink satellites. As a result, the spacecraft was deployed too low and eventually lost. SpaceX traced that anomaly to a crack line for a pressure sensor in the upper stage's liquid oxygen system. Falcon 9 returned to flight 2 weeks later, completing the mission July 27th. The rocket was grounded again after the first stage failed to land successfully during an August 28th mission, which otherwise went well. The hiatus was even shorter. Falcon 9 flew 2 successful missions 3 days later, both hitting their landings. And, more importantly, the rocket was grounded in July for the first time since 2016 after a second stage anomaly in space resulted in a batch of Starlinks getting lost. Of the Falcon 9's launch since June 2010, there have been a total of 4 anomalies, 3 of them happening this year. Despite this, Falcon 9 remains the most reliable rocket to date, with a success rate of 99.7%, a number that other rocket companies in the space industry can only dream of. And just like the previous 2 suspensions, SpaceX will quickly resume launches, possibly even by the time we broadcast this video. With the latest Falcon 9 anomaly, it can't be considered a total failure since it successfully put the Dragon capsule into its intended orbit. And of course, we can't overlook the importance of this very special mission. Saturday's mission marked SpaceX's 15th crew mission since 2020 and the company's 10th crewed launch for NASA. More noteworthy, this flight was unique as only 2 people got launched into orbit aboard SpaceX's Crew Dragon rather than the usual 4 astronauts. Because of this, ensuring safety before the flight was paramount, and naturally there were going to be challenges. Before launch, SpaceX put Falcon 9 rocket in the air and performed some last-minute troubleshooting on the Crew Dragon. Steve Stitch, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager, shared that the troubleshooting involved the chilled water system that's used for Dragon, which provides cooling for the Dragon spacecraft, and had sprung a leak at the last moment, which SpaceX promptly repaired. Another problem that surfaced on Dragon resulted from strong winds in Florida. According to NASA officials, after SpaceX static-fired Falcon 9, the soot produced from the engines, which typically exhausts out to the east of the water, was blown back onto the Dragon spacecraft. NASA and SpaceX discovered the soot when they rolled the vehicle back from the site and had to clean the solar arrays from the other areas of the ship. The SpaceX team did an incredible job of repainting in particular quadrants 1 and a little touch-up on 4, and it got all cleaned up and ready to go, added Stitch, explaining the paint's important to a spacecraft as it rejects the sun's heat and helps maintain temperatures in the harsh environments of space. This meticulous attention to detail by SpaceX stands in contrast to Boeing, which downplayed issues with the Starliner spacecraft before launch, leading to larger, more difficult-to-handle problems up there in space. Besides, SpaceX equipped its Dragon capsule with a new feature, an emergency landing capability using the Crew Dragon's thrusters. Stitch said, "We have a unique capability for the first time on Crew 8 and Crew 9. It's an emergency contingency capability for a landing where if the main parachutes were all to fail, the Super Draco thrusters would fire right before the vehicle would make contact with the wire, and then there'd be an emergency configuration to save the crew on a really bad day." Adding details about the new emergency landing, Bill Gerstenmaier, SpaceX's VP, shared that we've actually flown it on several other Dragon flights before this. This is the first time it flies on a NASA mission. He outlined that the way it works in the case is all parachutes totally fail. This essentially fires the thrusters at the very end that essentially gives the crew a chance to land safely and essentially escape. So it's not used in any, partial conditions. Since Dragon can land with one chute out, we can land with other failures in the chute system. Crew Dragon's also been certified for 210 days, said the NASA officials, after work covering Dragon's windows, the structure, the rotating machinery, the avionics, thermal protection, and the prop systems. With all new upgrades, safety profile of Dragon has improved, offering higher reliability for astronauts traveling aboard. And we're confident that with Dragon's latest crewed mission, Crew 9, it's going to be an incredible experience as astronauts return aboard the newly upgraded Crew Dragon. Not with 4 astronauts, but with 6. This is the solution to the space issue caused by Starliner after the first mission of the ISS. Starliner got launched in June with NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. Boeing's spacecraft did not get to the space station. Issues with thrusters and helium leaks impacted the mission, and NASA officials decided last month that bringing the crew back on Starliner was too risky. Ultimately, Starliner spacecraft returned safely to the Earth September 6th with a successful landing in New Mexico. However, it left Wilmore and Williams on the station with the 7-member-long crew of astronauts and cosmonauts. The station crew installed 2 temporary seats inside the Dragon spacecraft, currently docked at the outpost, where Starliner astronauts would return home if they needed to evacuate the complex in an emergency. The temporary solution allows Dragon spacecraft to come back to Earth with 6 people instead of the usual 4. This decision to bring Starliner back to Earth without a crew had some secondary effects on space station ops. Managers at Johnson Space Center in Houston had to decide who to take off the Crew 9 mission and who to retain in the crew. Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov ultimately retained their seats on the Crew 9 flight. Hague was initially trained as the pilot for Crew 9, but then NASA decided he would replace Zena Cardman as commander. Hague, a 49-year-old U.S. Space Force colonel, is a vet of long-duration missions on the ISS and also survived a rare launch abort back in 2018 when a Russian Soyuz rocket failed. NASA initially announced the Crew 9 astronauts assignment back in January. Cardman, a 36-year-old, was set to become the first rookie astronaut without test pilot experience to command a NASA spaceflight. 3-time Space Shuttle pilot Stephanie Wilson, 58, was the other astronaut removed from Crew 9. The decision over who would fly on Crew 9 was really a tough call, said Bauer Sox, who oversees NASA's Space Ops Mission Directorate. They gave a lot of thought to flying Zena, but in this case, having someone who's had at least one flight made sense. Gorbanov, a 34-year-old Russian aerospace engineer making his first spaceflight, transitioned to pilot the Crew Dragon spacecraft, although he's still officially designated as a mission specialist. His continued presence on the crew was ensured by an international agreement between NASA and Russia's space agency, providing seats for Russian cosmonauts on U.S. crew missions and U.S. astronauts on Russian Soyuz flights to the space station. Bauer Sox said NASA would reassign Cardman and Wilson to future flights. Once again, the FAA has forced SpaceX to halt all activities to investigate the latest issue with Falcon 9. But the question is this really worth an FAA investigation causing multiple missions to get delayed? Could there possibly be a political motive behind it? The FAA works too slowly. After the latest Falcon 9 incident, it wasn't until September 30th that the FAA officially requested the company to investigate the cause of the second-stage rocket malfunction. The belatedness came after SpaceX had already addressed the issue on its own, proactively postponing its later launches since Sunday. The agency stated, the FAA is aware an anomaly occurred during the SpaceX NASA Crew 9 that launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida on September 28th. The incident involved the Falcon 9 second-stage landing outside the designated hazard area. No injuries or property damage has been reported. The FAA is requiring an investigation. Even though SpaceX launched from NASA's complex in Florida, the FAA still licenses Falcon 9 flights. And this is exhausting, but it's already part of the government's rather tedious regulations. Just look how the FAA announced the FAA is aware an anomaly occurred, like some omnipotent body of gods interrupting someone to tell them something that they already know. But the reality is, they didn't know any more than we did at the time they made this announcement. Second stage of Falcon 9 experienced a minor issue during re-entry, and instead of hitting the target area, something caused it to veer off course and land outside the Pacific Ocean. Of course, the actual damage to anything was practically zero. This was not a serious incident for SpaceX, but it happened during a rather tense period between SpaceX, Elon, and the FAA regarding fines last year. It's hard not to speculate that this investigation might take longer than previous ones if the FAA is politically motivated. Let's take a small survey. If you think SpaceX will fly again soon, comment yes. Otherwise, comment no. Either way, we should think positively that once everything gets resolved, the FAA definitely won't be able to hold SpaceX back for long. Before the flight, NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch shared that his agency's worked with SpaceX on recent anomalies and the company's rocket. one of them involving the second stage of Falcon 9 having a faulty engine, while the other saw Falcon 9 first stage land hard on SpaceX's drone ship and then topple over. SpaceX responded quickly after the previous second stage anomaly, allowing the rocket to fly after ensuring that systems involved in the issue were not used in subsequent flights. It's unclear whether the same systems are involved in the latest Falcon 9 second stage anomaly, as SpaceX hasn't disclosed any further details about the upper stage's newest malfunction. Jonathan McDowell, an astrophysicist and expert in space flight, wrote on X that the most likely failure mode still led to re-entry, which was a mild burn of the Merlin vacuum. This could have caused the rocket to go off course and re-enter somewhere in the Pacific Ocean farther northeast than the expected recovery area. We hope that the rocket won't face too long of a delay, as SpaceX is still aiming for a record year of 148 launches. Including the recent Crew 9 launch, SpaceX has now done a total of 96 launches, consisting of 93 Falcon 9s, 1 Falcon Heavy, and 2 Starship launches. To hit 148 launches by the end of the year, SpaceX would need to hit a launch cadence of 2.47 days or fewer. After this suspension, the workhorse Falcon 9 is going to be very busy. History shows that SpaceX resumes Falcon 9 launches quickly, but significant interplanetary science missions remain hanging in the balance. Falcon 9 is scheduled to launch October 7th with the European Space Agency's Hera spacecraft to visit binary asteroids and study the system following NASA's DART spacecraft impact in 2022. DART tested an asteroid deflection technique that could move an object off a collision course with Earth. 3 days later, on October 10th, SpaceX is scheduled to launch NASA's $5 billion Europa Clipper mission on a Falcon Heavy to start a 6-year journey to Jupiter, where it'll explore one of the giant planet's icy moons. Falcon Heavy essentially uses the same upper stage design as Falcon 9. Both of these missions require 2 burns of Falcon 9's upper stage Merlin vacuum to send the Hera and Europa Clipper spacecraft beyond the solar system. They also have limited launch windows to leave Earth and get to their destinations. Hera's launch window runs from October 7th to the 27th, and Europa Clipper is October 10th to November 6th. These are crucial and expensive missions, with some payloads delayed for far too long and they desperately needed to fly, even requiring a specific launch window. For this reason, we hope that SpaceX's Falcon rockets can quickly identify the issue to get back in the air, racing towards new records for the year. While managing Falcon launches in Florida, SpaceX and Elon haven't forgotten to defend themselves and mock the absurdity of bureaucratic red tape. This time, not the FAA, but the FCC with an unacceptable announcement about Starlink. Although it's not directly tied to the company's rocket launches, Starlink is currently the primary payload and a major source of revenue, playing a big role in driving the development of SpaceX's rocket programs. Elon reposted the story on X, accompanied by the comment, "contemptible political lawfare." It's a blunt statement, but perfectly fitting given the disrespectful behavior government agencies are displaying towards SpaceX. Last year, in a written statement, the FCC upheld its 2022 decision to deny SpaceX Starlink an $885 million subsidy intended to provide broadband service to 642,000 rural Americans. FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel doubted Starlink's ability to deliver the promised service. Today, Starlink is connecting more than 7,700 new customers a day. FEMA is deploying Starlink to aid victims in North Carolina after the hurricane, and major airlines across the world are signing deals to outfit their entire fleets with Starlink. It's proven to be a fast, reliable service for millions. The FCC has program requirements that Starlink is not obligated to meet until next year. However, Chair Rosenworcel prematurely predicted Starlink wouldn't meet these requirements, despite the deadline being years away. By December 31st next year, Starlink is expected to demonstrate its ability to provide high-speed internet to at least 40% of the 642,000 rural locations, and it's already shown it can do that. So why revoke the $800 million subsidy? It makes no sense. Chair Rosenworcel claims Starlink is unreliable, but if that were true, why are other U.S. government agencies signing major contracts with SpaceX for Starlink? The FCC needs to reverse this. If the government tries to connect those 642,000 Americans with fiber, it costs 10 times more and take years. SpaceX is ramping up production of Starlink so fast that it'll soon be the largest producer of printed circuit boards in America. The biggest losers of this are the 642,000 people who could have high-speed internet much faster. After all, if the FCC maintains this decision, it's not just going to affect SpaceX, but harm hundreds of thousands of Americans waiting on high-speed internet. While Starlink has proven its ability to deliver fast and reliable service, denying this subsidy could slow the network's expansion into remote areas. This not only hinders economic and education development in rural regions, but also widens the digital divide between urban and rural areas. Moreover, this decision could be seen as a setback in efforts to promote technological innovation and competition in the telecom sector. SpaceX, with its advanced satellites, is providing a viable solution to address connectivity issues in hard-to-reach areas. Failing to support these efforts could discourage other tech companies from investing in similar challenges. Ultimately, the dispute highlights the need for a more flexible approach to managing public resources. Regulatory agencies like the FCC need to carefully balance adhering to regulations with fostering innovation, especially when dealing with technologies that have the potential to bring significant societal benefits. Achieving this balance ensures that public policies don't inadvertently hinder progress, but instead facilitate sustainable and equitable growth in the digital age. In the latest meeting last week, President Gwynne Shotwell informed Texas lawmakers, "This week, by the way, we'll pass 4 million customers for Starlink," which is quite exciting. The milestone means SpaceX has gained 1 million new customers since the end of May. This outpaces the company's already impressive growth rate. Starlink started providing beta service of its product in October 2020, hitting 1 million subscribers by December 22, 2 million by September 23, and 3 million this May. The constellation now comprises nearly 6,000 satellites, with service available in 100 countries to individual users as well as large enterprise customers like airlines and cruise ships. The service is on track to generate $6 billion in revenue this year, an increase from roughly $1.5 billion just 2 years ago, according to research and consulting firm Quality Space. Starlink is central to SpaceX's plan to commercialize and eventually explore space. While the companies continue to raise money from investors, CEO Elon has said for years that revenue from the broadband internet service could help fund further development for the massive reusable rocket Starship. In turn, bringing Starship online helps the company launch even more Starlink satellites at a greater cadence. Just 3 months ago, the Europa Clipper mission set to launch aboard the Falcon Heavy hit an unexpected roadblock due to radiation concerns with its payload. This unfortunate development left the space community disappointed, especially as it meant no Falcon Heavy launches for the rest of the year. Fortunately, the story has taken a positive turn. NASA just announced the updated launch schedule for Falcon Heavy, now set to carry out one of the agency's flagship missions. But why is Falcon Heavy so crucial to this mission? And why has it consistently remained NASA's top choice for high-profile launches? Falcon Heavy is a rare heavy-lift rocket developed by SpaceX designed to meet the demand for launching large and heavy payloads into space. Because of this, although Falcon Heavy launches are much fewer compared to Falcon 9, with only 10 accounting for just 2% of Falcon 9's total, each Falcon Heavy mission carries immense importance. Every launch entrusted to Falcon Heavy either supports high-profile U.S. military ops or extremely costly government missions. Since 2019, just a year after its first launch, Falcon Heavy got 5 commercial contracts worth between $500 and $750 million, covering the rocket's development costs and probably then some. Excluding its maiden voyage in 2018, all other missions were purchased at prices ranging from $160 to $300 million, depending on the complexity and payload of the mission. Falcon Heavy's unique structure consists of 3 Falcon 9 boosters connected to form its first stage, allowing it to lift a payload of 53,000 kilos into orbit, almost twice as much as its closest competitor, Boeing's Delta IV Heavy. In addition to its impressive performance, Falcon Heavy captivates the audience with its stunning synchronized landing of its 2 to 3 boosters. What really sets Falcon Heavy apart in the space community is its perfect track record. It's never failed a mission, a factor that becomes increasingly important for contractors on the rocket launch market. Building on these achievements, and especially to strengthen its rep, Falcon Heavy is set to launch another mission carrying NASA's $5.2 billion payload, the Europa Clipper. If all goes according to plan, the launch is scheduled for October 10th, marking Falcon Heavy's 2nd mission of the year and its 11th overall. Before diving deep into this mission, we got to clarify one thing. Europa Clipper was not originally intended for SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. Years ago, a Senate bill funding NASA's Europa Clipper mission required the use of the SLS for launch. However, by around 2021, a combination of factors led the agency to change its decision. One key reason was the realization that switching to Falcon Heavy could save him a lot of money. At the time, the acting director of the White House Budget Office stated that the estimate cost per SLS launch would exceed $2 billion once development was completed. By opting for a commercial launch vehicle, NASA could save over $1.5 billion, and that came after NASA's Inspector General emphasized the need for flexibility in choosing launch vehicles. The push from the administration and NASA's leadership for this flexibility paid off, and SpaceX ultimately was selected to launch Europa Clipper. The cost of launching the spacecraft on a Falcon Heavy was just $178 million, a staggering difference compared to the estimated $2 billion for an SLS launch. Besides these cost savings, there were concerns about the availability of SLS. Delays had already pushed back its readiness, making it uncertain whether the rocket could launch by this year. While SLS might have allowed an earlier launch, potentially a year and a half sooner, those advantages were negated by delays. Additionally, NASA believed one of SLS's main contractors, Boeing, would struggle to build another SLS core stage in time for the launch window. As a result, the agency decided to focus SLS resources on lunar missions and human exploration rather than Europa. If cost and readiness were not enough, there were also tech concerns about SLS's performance for the mission. The rocket's solid rocket boosters, or SRBs we'll call, created vibrations that could be damaging to the Europa Clipper payload. Redesigning the spacecraft to withstand these vibrations was estimated to cost $1 billion. Therefore, switching to Falcon Heavy not only saved about $3 billion in total, but also avoided costly redesigns and mission risks. So, what exactly is going to happen during the Europa Clipper mission? Once the Falcon Heavy rocket successfully delivers its payload into the correct orbit, the probe, which will head towards Jupiter to study its Galilean moon Europa, recently passed a crucial technical review called Key Decision Point E, clearing the way for its launch. Scientists believe that Jupiter's icy moon Europa has suitable conditions below its surface to support life, said NASA's Science Mission Director and Associate Administrator Nicola Fox on September 10th. Those ingredients are water, energy, and chemistry. Studying this by flying close to that moon and flying through the plumes that come up will help us better understand the astrobiology and the potential for habitable worlds beyond our own planet Earth. The spacecraft, developed by NASA in partnership with Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Lab, will take around 5.5 years to go the 628 million kilometers to Europa. Once it gets there, it's going to spend approximately 4 years studying the moon and doing scientific experiments, going as close as 25 kilometers to the surface. Space is not for the faint-hearted, and it's even more ambitious as this spacecraft, the largest that NASA's ever built for planetary exploration, will travel into the incredibly harsh radiation environment around Jupiter, said Fox. The launch clearance represents a sharp turnaround for the mission, which as recently as May was experiencing engineering issues. Specifically, engineers realized that Clipper's transistors, which controlled the flow of electricity on the spacecraft, could fail at lower radiation levels than previously thought. However, after an exhaustive round of recent testing and analysis, NASA decided that the spacecraft system should last the distance. We concluded after all this testing that during our orbits around Jupiter, while Europa Clipper does dip into the radiation environment, once it comes out long enough to give those transistors the opportunity to heal and partially recover between flybys, said Europa Clipper project manager Jordan Evans. NASA has enclosed Europa Clipper's payload and other electronics in a thick-walled vault made of titanium and aluminum that'll act as a radiation shield against most of the high-energy atomic particles and hopefully slow down the degradation of the spacecraft systems. This is a tactic learned and used by NASA's Juno mission to Jupiter. Europa Clipper's mission's key objectives are to produce high-res images of Europa's surface, determine its composition, look for signs of recent or ongoing geological activity, measure the thickness of the moon's icy shell, search for subsurface lakes, and determine the depth and salinity of Europa's ocean. Our launch window opens October 10th, and the spacecraft will lift off from Kennedy Space Center, said Fox. We're excited and ready to carry out Europa's mission as planned, including the baseline science plan we had before we discovered the transistor issues. We're now confident we can deliver that mission. If a successful and on-time launch is delivered, Europa Clipper is set to reach Jupiter by 2030, with the spacecraft performing its orbital burn after April 11, 2030. During the time between launch and its arrival on Jupiter, the spacecraft will execute flybys of Earth and Mars, maneuvers known as gravity assists, which help change the spacecraft's speed and trajectory to get to Jupiter, all while conserving fuel. While in orbit around Jupiter, the spacecraft will conduct up to 45 to 50 flybys of Europa, coming as close as 25 kilometers to the icy, smooth surface of the moon. So, what would happen if Europa Clipper could prove the existence of this ocean and provide evidence of life on the moon? What are the next steps, and will NASA and other space agencies investigate the possibility of a Europa lander in the future? One of the things that I worked on in addition to Europa Clipper was a Europa lander mission concept, which unfortunately was not chosen to go forward in this latest decade survey. One of the things that came out of that project, though, is this recon focus group. And as part of the focus group, we want to make sure that Europa Clipper collects the right kind of data set so that a future mission lands on Europa can use that data to land. So one of the things that we've done is we've looked at the trajectory that Europa Clipper will fly and the details of each of the closer flybys, and there's only a handful of those that actually meet our criteria for what we think a future mission will need to have to perform a landing. And those are things like resolution, but also viewing geometry and illumination angle, which is based on our experience with landing on places like Mars. So since we'll be using a terrain relative navigation and our hazard avoidance and stuff like that, whatever data set we get from Europa Clipper is the data set that'll be used to help pick a landing site for a future landing mission. That's what Phillips, a project scientist, said, who's over at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Even if that landing mission is 20 or 30 years off in the future, you're going to want to make sure that we have the data set in the bag. That's something we'll make sure Europa Clipper does, which is to do the best job it can collecting a reconnaissance data set for future use. Europa Clipper is certainly going to be one of the most anticipated and important missions of this decade and decades to come. Hopefully, this mission will be the first of many future missions to the outer solar system aimed at confirming the habitability of several moons around Jupiter and Saturn. Working alongside Europa Clipper at Jupiter will be ESA's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, commonly referred to as JUICE, which plans to study not just Europa, but also Jupiter's other moons. Together, these two missions will provide scientists with more data and images than ever before on the icy moons in our solar system, paving the way for new missions and concepts to explore deeper into the solar system in the search for life.
Space Force, and now we're leading in space over Russia and China. They were killing us when I took over, and now we're leading. But military, we're going to reach, and it's my plan. I'll talk to Elon. Elon, get those rocket ships going, because we want to reach Mars before the end of my term. We want to do it. And we want to have also great military protection in space, because that's where it's going to be at.
Yes, those were indeed the powerful and inspiring words of Donald Trump as he addressed the American public. It's clear he supports Elon and SpaceX, with the Starship project to Mars steadily attaining major milestones. So, how might Trump's support affect Elon's Mars plans? Is the 2-year timeline realistic? SpaceX planning to send humans to Mars is currently one of the most inspiring projects for humanity. Even those who were previously skeptical now agree SpaceX and Elon are making major progress in evolving over time. Even Donald Trump, who initially seemed focused on emphasizing U.S. leadership through short-term milestones near Earth, has now publicly voiced support for Elon's Mars plan. If these two men align, their partnership could significantly shape the future of the U.S. space exploration and defense, as well as shift the balance of power between the public and private sectors in space. Trump, currently campaigning for re-election, is rumored to be considering offering Elon an advisory role should he win a second term. With public backing and Elon's financial support, it now seems likely that Trump would grant him an official position in his administration. If Elon takes a more prominent role in a second Trump administration, he could accelerate ambitious space missions and timelines. The initial focus would remain on the Artemis program and lunar settlements, with increasing attention eventually shifting towards manned missions to Mars. Recently, Elon candidly tweeted about his plan to launch 5 spacecraft to Mars within 2 years. If all those land safely, then crewed missions are possible in 4 years. If we encounter challenges, then the crewed missions will be postponed another 2 years. One of Elon's major concerns, however, is the growing government bureaucracy, which he claims is hindering Starship. One of my biggest concerns right now is that the Starship program is being smothered by a mountain of government bureaucracy that grows every year, Elon wrote on X. This stifling red tape is affecting all large projects in America, which is why, for example, California spent $7 billion in several years on high-speed rail and only has a 1,600-foot section of concrete to show for it. Elon, who has endorsed President Trump for another 4 years in office, expressed significant concerns about Vice President Kamala Harris potentially becoming president. His absolute showstopper, he noted, is the bureaucracy currently choking America to death, and it's guaranteed to grow under a Democratic Party administration. This would destroy the Mars program and doom humanity. These remarks come as Starship faces challenges from certain government environmental agencies like the FAA. However, it's clear that current space regulations are overly restrictive and seem to be evolving at a much slower pace than SpaceX is advancing each day. If the Elon-Trump partnership succeeds with Trump as POTUS, it could further accelerate the commercialization of space. Elon may advocate for the removal of more regulations on space activities, potentially challenging existing safety and security standards. Meanwhile, a Trump presidency would likely seek to reduce legal barriers through directives like Trump's Space Policy Directive 2, which aims to streamline commercial space regs to encourage faster growth and innovation in the private space industry. While Elon could push for cost cuts, innovation, and efficiency, it'll be interesting to see how his efforts fare against the government bureaucracy. Could Elon influence U.S. space policy regarding international competitors like China? Undoubtedly, other factors come into play too. However, the CEO's presence in a second Trump term could shed light on whether commercial space players might help ease tensions between countries in space. Elon is not a politician. He's a visionary and a problem solver, focused on the future of humanity. Although Musk has a habit of setting ambitious timelines, with the most recent being a Mars launch in 2 years, many are skeptical about its feasibility. This timeline coincides with the Artemis mission, which requires the Starship to perform its duties. However, I got to tell you that the appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the best way to hide something is in plain sight. Much of the Starship's development for the HLS has dual-use potential, meaning it can be applied to both Moon and Mars missions. Example, SpaceX plans to build a fuel depot to refuel HLS in low Earth orbit before sending it to the Moon, and that same depot can be used to refuel Mars-bound spacecraft. Also, they're working on projects that may seem to have limited lunar applications, but are highly relevant for Mars, effectively building a Mars program in parallel. SpaceX prioritizes its development projects by focusing on the next technology they need, allowing them to take incremental steps towards the ultimate goal. The immediate priority for Mars is orbital refueling, which requires a fuel depot and a tanker variant of Starship to resupply the depot in orbit. The next Starship flight will test fuel transfer between the main vehicle and its storage tanks in microgravity. And that's an essential capability needed to master before transferring fuel between two docked spacecraft, e.g. from the tanker to the depot and then to the Starship heading up to Mars. In reality, SpaceX could perform a lunar mission every 2 years for NASA with just one fuel depot and a reusable tanker. However, they're currently constructing a star factory that'll make a Starship every day at their Starbase launch facility in Texas. This production rate is essential for hitting those Mars goals, which could require sending millions of tons of cargo to Mars during each transfer window. As Gwynne Shotwell once said, what we want to do is make a rocket every day, because if you're going to take people to Mars, you're going to do it in a flotilla. You really want to launch hundreds of Starships during that period when you're taking people there. Without a doubt, SpaceX intends to accumulate a fleet of colony ships in LEO during the 26-month intervals between Mars departure windows. This suggests that maintenance needed for these ships, like replacing heat shields or working on the engine bay, will likely involve some extravehicular activity, like manned spacewalks. SpaceX has already successfully tested an EV suit during the Polaris spacewalk. This mission also tested laser comms with their Starlink constellation, another critical technology for maintaining contact with a large number of spaceships in orbit. They've also flown near the Van Allen belts to test the vehicle's radiation protection and assess the impact of deep space travel, and that's vital data for any Mars mission. Perhaps the most compelling evidence that SpaceX is prepping for Mars is the number of launch pads they're building. While only one launch pad is needed for Artemis, they plan to operate 4, as we know. Interestingly, they also intend to produce thousands of tons of liquid oxygen on offshore platforms, likely to supply 2 floating spaceports that'll increase their launch capacity. Given the urgency of all these developments, it looks like SpaceX is pursuing Mars landings with a sense of immediacy. This shows that any dual-use capabilities they develop for Artemis will immediately be applied to the Mars efforts, as these 2 programs effectively run in parallel with each other. In fact, SpaceX doesn't expect to get to the Moon before 2026 due to remaining milestones like developing an orbital depot that can do long-term fuel storage and conduct automated HLS landings on the Moon to demonstrate system safety. However, Elon, known for his impatience, may test an automated Mars mission shortly after the first lunar landing. If successful, a crewed Mars mission could follow shortly after the first astronaut getting to the Moon, possibly as early as 2028 or 29. Getting to Mars, I think, will put people down within the decade, Gwynne Shotwell said. Of course, more technology is required to colonize Mars, which SpaceX currently does not possess. Fortunately, Elon has founded or acquired various companies to develop all the advanced technologies needed. Tesla will provide pressurized Cybertrucks for surface transport. Optimus robots to aid in colony construction, and solar panels with energy storage. The Boring Company will supply tunneling machines to dig radiation-shielded habitats and extract water from excavated material, critical for sustaining life. Specifically about this, Elon Musk spoke at the ISS R&D conference, Innovation Beyond Boundaries. Here's what he said. On the software side, XAI will train specialized AI for tasks such as piloting spacecraft, coordinating settlements, resource extraction, and manufacturing. And last but not least, Neuralink will enable colonists to communicate directly with these AIs, allowing real-time, almost instantaneous responses, literally at the speed of thought. Hopefully, this will cover the major necessities, and they can source any additional required tech from external companies. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.